morning, book lovers. I'm Sarah from the Book Bar, and today I actually wish that we were sitting around a coffee house and just drinking our warm pumpkin spice whatever and talking about a topic that I feel like not many people like to discuss. It's kind of something that ends up being pretty secretive in people's lives. But because of that, it has devastating effects. And we've seen that over this past year and a half with COVID and all the isolation. And the topic is mental health and your mental health state. And you're probably wondering, why is Sarah talking about mental health on a channel that deals with reading and writing? Well, I will explain that to you. But first, you need to subscribe, you need to hit the notification button, like, share, all those fun jazz things so that we can bring these messages to more and more people because you have decided that we're fun to listen to. So with that, okay, so I'd like to begin by being a little transparent to you because we're all best friends, right? I have dealt with mental health issues. I lost my mother-in-law at the age of 60 to pancreatic cancer. And that last year of her life was a year that was incredibly amazing in some aspects and completely devastating in other aspects. Losing her was a feeling I've never experienced before. I hadn't lost someone close to me before, and it's a deep, deep ache. On top of that, less than a year after her death, I myself was diagnosed with cancer, which I'm fine. It was removed and I'm currently cancer-free, but definitely monitored. So all of that is great. But those two things back to back, on top of some other things that happened in my life, definitely caused a disruption in my mental state. The small amount of anxiety I had in my life prior to all that amplified to a very grand scale. I dealt with grief, which led to depression. There were lots of things that I was trying to process through at a young age that I'd never experienced before, and it was a dark time in my life. One of the things, I do recommend, if you have things, my little PSA, like if you do have areas of your life that need somebody who is a professional, please go to a professional. My tips here are all tips that help lead to the process of seeing a professional. So if you need to speak to a professional, 100% please do that. I am not a professional. So, but one of the things that researchers have shown is that journaling helps with mental acuity. I have probably journaled my whole life, probably since I started writing. I have always loved writing things down, which shouldn't have come to a surprise for me that I wanted to be a writer, but still, it was a surprise. But anyways, I always journaled. But the key thing that researchers have said about journaling is that you have to be transparent. You have to be honest with yourself. There's no point in journaling and you're sugarcoating it. We do that with people. Someone asks you how you're doing, you're like, oh, I'm great, things are great. Hey, how are you? Good, all good. We say it's all good to everybody all the time. We don't really, sit down and be like, oh, well, I've been really depressed. Like, nobody says that. If you do, you're an anomaly. But not many people do that. But honestly, if you look at the statistics right now, within this past year and a half, almost 2 years of COVID and this isolation and the fact that we're not allowed to be around other people, or there's this fear of other people, the suicide rates have just skyrocketed. And why is that? It's because we need people, we need outlets, we need to be able to talk. But since we can't do that, as writers, we should write. Write down your feelings. Be honest with yourself. Be transparent with yourself. No one else is going to read this. This isn't something you're submitting. This is not like, I'm writing my memoir. This is not. This is for you to help you be in the mindset that you need to be, in a healthy mindset. Researchers have shown that people that have gone through traumatic events in their lives are more likely to reach out for help after they have journaled about the traumatic event. It's like once you've talked to yourself about it and grouped all these feelings and emotions and stuff into like understandable categories. I think that's the problem, is when we go through things that are really hard, it's like we have these feelings and we're all upset and logically, I mean, we're smart people, so logically we're like, well, this isn't right, this doesn't make sense, that's not a true statement. Logically we can say that, but emotionally we're not there, and there's this disconnect. And so for writers, it's very helpful, or for anybody, but writers who know how to put feelings into words, because they do it all the time for their characters, writers that know how to put feelings into words, it's very important to do this writing process where we write about these events and we're honest about these events, whether it's complete sentence structure or not. Like, allow yourself to just write as you talk, to just write what comes to mind. But that takes time, and that takes time for yourself. And everyone's all about self-care, you know, bubble baths and this and that. That's all great. That self-care is important too. But self-care for yourself mentally is very important. I know for me, I take time in the morning to journal. I have my quiet time, and I sit down and I journal. And when I journal, sometimes it's rough, and sometimes it's dealing with stuff that's just coming up that hasn't been dealt with yet. And it's just like I wake up and I just feel blah, and I'm angry. And when we're not able to like see people face to face, and we spend all our time on social media and all we're seeing is like the great pictures of everybody's lives, it's like, how can their lives be so great? I feel so miserable, and that stuff needs to be said. And if you don't say it to someone, then say it to yourself. Write it down, because there's a process of writing something down and it actually feeling like it's been said, feeling like it's true, feeling like it's been acknowledged, because sometimes when we just keep things inside, even if we do tell someone, they don't always respond the way we want them to respond. So definitely start journaling and give that time to yourself. Also, something about journaling is that it helps us become a little bit more self-aware. What's really going on in our brain? We run around so busy every day. We, have all these things on our to-do list, everything that we need to do. And then it's like, what are we really thinking about? What's really bothering us? Some people are so good at just masking over feelings and what's going on, and they're just like yes people, and they're like whatever, and then all of a sudden just erupt. So journaling gives us that inner clarity, to be able to see, like, what are some problems that I'm dealing with? What are some things that upset me? Another thing that journaling can help with is, as you have journaled for a little while, you can go back and read what you journaled months ago or something, or even years ago. I've gone back to journals from when I was in junior high or high school, and it's humorous on one hand, but it's also really neat to see how my life has changed or progressed. You know, I'm a believer, so it's also really nice to see what I feel like God has answered in my life, or directions he has taken me, or prayers that have been answered. So those things are really nice to see, that it's hard to see in the moment. So keeping a record, keeping a journal kind of helps in that process. So there are 3 types of writing that researchers suggest that help with mental clarity or dealing with mental issues. And the first one is expressive writing. And this is kind of typically what they use, like if you go see a psychologist or a psychiatrist, it's having you write down like your emotions, having you write down like what you're feeling about certain topics, you know, what you're feeling about, you know, this or that, so that you have that kind of self-awareness of what's going on in your life, and what you're actually feeling about things. Because like I said, you know, we tend to kind of just cover over things. But then, like, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but you're like in a conversation with somebody, and then somebody brings up some topic, and all of a sudden you have all these feelings about it, and you have all this, like, you know, it just starts rambling out of you, and you're like, wow, I didn't even know that bothered me. But apparently it does. So it gives you that kind of clue in on your trigger, on why you might have some issues on certain topics and not other topics. And that helps, you know, a psychologist or a psychiatrist or just a counselor, you know, help you process through things that maybe aren't in line of how you should feel on certain topics, or why you're upset on certain topics. So the second type of writing that researchers have found helpful is reflective writing. This is actually done a lot more in like nurse or a teacher or something like that they can write down kind of like areas that they're learning or growing. It's kind of just reflective on where you are at the moment in some practice or some understanding, and like where you need to go. It kind of like helps set goals. It helps figure out like directions to take, you know, what's, you know, realistic in your life. I tend to have very unrealistic goals of myself. I set very high expectations of myself. So myselves, there's more than one of me. That would be great. I never end up reaching, you know, the end goal. So there are times that I need to like evaluate, like, really, I need to be reflective. I need to like evaluate, like, is this actually possible in one day? Is this actually possible in 3 months or 6 months or whatever? Like, I am not Superwoman, and that's hard for me to admit sometimes. I know you all think I'm Superwoman, but it's actually very difficult to admit, especially if you're a mom, that you're not going to be able to accomplish everything in one day. So reflective writing can be very helpful, as long as it stays positive. Like, don't just be like, I'm the biggest loser in the whole wide world because I can't, you know, accomplish A, B, and C. Make sure it stays positive, and then you set goals that are attainable, and start small and then go big. Because once you start accomplishing goals, then you start to feel really good about yourself. And as we're approaching, I mean, not like right away, but in a few months, NaNoWriMo, that's something to, you know, one, is that possible in your life? Is it possible to do NaNoWriMo in the month of November in your life? Like, is it? And be honest with yourself about that. And if it is, what is an honest goal based on your day-to-day, in and out, whatever? What is an honest goal? Like, that kind of reflective, projected goal making is very helpful in making sure that you stay in a positive mental state. Because I don't know how many times I've written a to-do list for like one day, and I've gotten like 3 things accomplished, and it just runs my evening. I feel like I didn't accomplish anything, when in reality, I chose spending time with my daughter over, you know, like pounding away at the keyboard, you know, and that's impactful. That's not a bad choice. And I don't need to beat myself up about that. I just made unrealistic goals for that day. And that was the problem. The third and final kind of writing that researchers have said is helpful is basically what all of us do, which is creative writing. And I don't know what kind of writing you do, but the mindset behind creative writing and living in kind of an imaginary world, following these characters around that do and say what you tell them to do, actually can be incredibly therapeutic. For example, one of the examples that they gave was, let's say you're a picture book writer and you write a story about an owl, and that owl, that story is basically talking about your issue with insomnia. But it's told from an owl's perspective. An owl's up, all night. So, it's those kind of things. You can deal with deep topics. You can deal with like grief and all that kind of stuff in creative writing. I know Christy and I have written about PTSD in some of our characters. We've written about the need for sedatives, which again, transparent, that's my anxiety meds. And I have dealt with PTSD dealing with cancer and the fact that I had cancer. So those kind of things, those kind of issues, family relationships, those kind of things, you can actually work out with your characters. And that's another way to be very helpful. So if you don't have time to sit down every day and like journal about just your feelings or whatever, which I still do recommend. But if you don't have time for that, if you allot your writing time to be on your work in progress or your querying process or your deadline to whatever you have going on, then try and work out the issues that you have, that you're dealing with in your life through your characters. I know that characters read better if the feelings seem authentic. I'm not going to be able to write how a boy feels going through puberty. That's not going to come out authentic. I am not a boy. I don't even have a son. I only have a daughter. And it's not going to come out authentic. So I'm not going to understand those feelings, but I am going to understand the feelings of a girl who has a broken heart. I am going to understand the feelings of a character who loses a family member. I am going to understand those feelings. I'm going to be able to write those feelings authentically. And as I do that, I'm working through stuff that's going on in my life. It's not the be-all, end-all way to do it, but it definitely is a step in the right direction to be able to process through what's going on in your life and work it out through a gift and talent that you've been given. So those are my suggestions on how writing can help with mental illness. I hope that it's been helpful to you. I hope that you utilize some of those ways. Since we're in isolation so much, and I know some states are way worse than Texas, and that's where I am, but it's very important. Like I said, the fact that our suicide rates are up so high, why families are separating, and the abuse rates are so high, and it's devastating all over, and all of that is because there was all that stuff there before. There was stuff that people were dealing with before we became isolated in our homes. And it was also stuff that we were pushing down. Like if you think about, families that are, suffering right now or on the verge of splitting up. That stuff just didn't happen because of isolation and happened because of COVID. There was stuff going on in those families way before we were stuck at home, but it was never dealt with. It was not discussed. It was pushed down. There was excuses made for it. The emotions weren't dealt with. The conversations weren't had. And because of that, now they're in situations where they're stuck together and they can't stand one another. So it's important. It's important for you, it's important for your family, it's important for our world that we learn to evaluate our emotions, write them down, figure out what's going on inside of us, process it, and know that we're all in the same boat. We're all going through the same things. We all have similar struggles. As writers, we know rejection more than most people. My daughter is an actress, and I feel like she understands rejection just as much as I do as a writer. It's a hard thing, and it's a hard thing to process. And we need to be able to write about it because that is our gift. Musicians, they write songs about issues that go on in their lives. So if this video could speak to people other than writers, if this can be shared with somebody that you know doesn't have the gift for writing, but struggles with things, like share that with them. Journaling is how we start. And if they're not somebody sitting there trying to write a novel or not a songwriter or whatever, there needs to be a way for people to get things out that can hopefully lead them to the help that they need. So I want to give you a few quick tips to start journaling if you aren't used to that kind of thing. So the first thing is I want you to commit to writing down something for about 20 minutes a day. Give yourself 20 minutes a day. Find 20 minutes a day for yourself to write. Whether that is, like I said, in your work in progress, which you're probably already scheduling time and it's more than 20 minutes a day, but it would be beneficial if you're dealing with some issues in your life to set aside 20 minutes a day that deal with just you, not your character's emotions, but your emotions. Whether that be expressive writing or reflective writing or just writing whatever comes to mind. Give yourself 20 minutes a day and just start doing that and see if it grows. See if it's less. See whatever. See what comes out of you, but allow yourself that freedom. The second tip is to try and find like a private personal space to do the journaling. Don't just like sit at the kitchen table. I mean, if the kitchen table is a private personal space for you, that's fine. But find a place that's comfy. Just like how we like to set up everything for a nice, lovely bubble bath with our bath bombs and our glass of wine and our soothing music, just like all that, find a comfortable place for you to not be distracted, and you can write. You can just write what you're feeling. Maybe you've got some kind of self-help books around that have helped you, maybe some Bible studies, maybe the Bible itself, but some things that might have helped you be able to understand and process through some of the things that you're going through. I know that when I was dealing with all the grief, I actually took a course that my church was offering called GriefShare. I know that that is worldwide, so if you've ever heard about that, I can see if I can find a link to it that's not connected to my church specifically, but just like a link in general. If I find that, then I'll tag that in this video. That allowed me once a week because, long story short, when I was dealing with the loss of my mother-in-law, my daughter was very young and she didn't do well with mommy being super sad at home. When I cried, she cried. So I had to bottle up everything until the night that I got to go to GriefShare. And when I went to GriefShare, I just sobbed the whole time. I was just sobbing because that's where I could get out my emotion. That's where I could process my emotion because it was difficult to do it at home. And she was so young. She wasn't at school yet or anything like that. So it was a hard time. I had to find those private personal spaces that I could go to that she wouldn't hear me or that I could write or whatever, because as soon as I started writing about my feelings about the loss of my mother-in-law, the tears came. And it wasn't pretty tears. It was the ugly, loud cry. And as soon as she heard that, she could be upstairs and she was do, and she was right into my room asking me, "What's wrong, mommy?" and then crying herself. So finding a place, whether it's at your house, if you don't have a space at your house, maybe it's a coffee shop, maybe it's the corner of some Barnes and Nobles, I don't know, wherever it is, find a place that you can devote to yourself, to be able to give yourself the time that you need to be able to process through the emotions that you have. And then finally, there is no right way to journal. Even though I've given you all these different suggestions, there's no right way to journal. Write for you. Write what makes you feel good. Write what helps you process. Be free and open to be able to write whatever you want to write. Just make sure that you're transparent with yourself. Don't waste your own time. I mean, people waste your time sometimes, but don't waste your own time. If you're devoting 20 minutes a day, give yourself those 20 minutes a day. It's like planning a bubble bath and then sitting in lukewarm water. I mean, who wants to do that? Because we've all got something. We've all got something we're going through, whether it's as deep as grief, worse than grief, difficulties dealing with rejection. I mean, I did a whole video on rejection, but even that, it's not easy. Rejection never is easy, whether it's personal. Well, I think all sort of rejection is personal, but I mean, like, whether it's between people or rejection of one of your writing babies, you know, I mean, it's rejection and it's hard. I do want to close on a verse from the Bible. Not trying to be preachy, but like I said, I am a believer, and so for me, the Bible is something that I go to help me deal with some things. But I want to read to you from Psalms 139, which if you haven't read that chapter in the Bible, the whole chapter is awesome, but I just have a little snippet of it that I would like to read to you. It's Psalms 139, verse 13 through 14. You formed my innermost being. You shaped my delicate inside and my intricate outside, and wove them all together in my mother's womb. Thank you, God, for making me so mysteriously complex. Everything you do is marvelously breathtaking. It simply amazes me to think about it, how thoroughly you know me, Lord. And I want that to encourage you in that you are not alone. Even though we are isolated, we are known and we are loved. Keep writing.